Yeah, let me just start by saying my name is Stephen Shapiro. I've been a devotee of Adidas Samraj since sometime in 2001, and I've spent a lot of time on Beezone, and over the years, I've really appreciated it and have had some conversations with Ed, and I was just thinking it'd be interesting for you to get a chance to speak about yourself, about your process with coming to develop Beezone and your relationship with Adida. I don't know if you've done that before. You've probably interviewed hundreds of people, but maybe we can turn it around a little bit. How's that sound?
That sounds fine.
Good. Good.
Yeah, yeah.
So I thought, I mean, I don't know anything about your early ed. You might want to tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what it was like for you as a kid.
Well, briefly,
Yeah.
um, I was born in 1945. That makes me 75 years old today. So I was born in New York, Long Island, outside of New York City, and most of the world revolved around Manhattan. My father was a book production, uh, a magazine. He worked with book publishers, and back in those days, how you made
Mm-hmm.
books and things of that sort. And his brother was a historian in NYU, and my mother went to law school. And we were raised a Catholic, had four siblings, and so just a good Catholic boy in New York, living in a Leave It to Beaver world in a
Uh-huh.
urban area, um, not too far from Franklin Square. Um, who we used to play as I was an athlete and a baseball player. We used to play
Mm-hmm.
Franklin Square in baseball,
Mm.
which is kind of ironic in my world anyway. People, small town, a little hamlet they called it, Carroll Place. And then I'll just briefly jump. Got
Uh,
drafted in 1965 during the
you
Vietnam
did.
War. Got out of the army thinking that the world was still like Leave It to Beaver, and it was not. Got out in 1968 and didn't recognize the town in which I lived in all my life because everybody had bell bottoms, long hair,
Uh,
and everybody who I hung around with in high school had just been drafted and then being in Vietnam and I mean, it was just a wild, different world.
Different
So
time.
LSD was on the top of the list, and unbeknownst to me, I didn't know. I was given a little blotter acid in sometime in 1968, and that opened up a whole world that I really had um, no idea existed. And then started to pursue that
I
that
don't think
award.
it was me that gave you that blotter, although it could have been.
You maybe made it, uh, but I was not interested in chasing Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix and following the music, although some of the music did interest me. Mostly, I was interested in pursuing what this new awareness was, and so that really got me quickly. I'll do it again. Alan Watts and D.T. Suzuki and the the Buddhist Society in London and Christmas Humphreys, and then it just went off to Richard Robertson in Michigan, and it just went bananas because I was really exploring that world and wound up going to Naropa in 1974. I'm jumping
Mm.
all over the place. Um, I worked and studied and practiced with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and some of the other major teachers within that lineage and set up. And then I moved to New Orleans to go to graduate school and finish a lot of the studies. And I was a special education teacher. That was my profession, but also interested in a lot of other things. So, um,
You jumped off and covered quite a bit. Can you share one or two things about your time with Trumpa?
yeah. Well, um, you know, at that time in 1973, 1974, 1975, Trungpa just came to the United States in 1970. But he was an explosive force throughout the nation in the world of universities and what was happening that I was a part of all over the country, which is this awakening. But the time with Trungpa was more about meditation, because that was the emphasis in the practice in his Dharma Dhatus and his centers in Boulder and all over the countries, and where I was in New Orleans, which was actually setting up a Dharma study group, which was a term used to identify the groups that were starting, and then that would turn into a Dharma Dhatu. But anyway, with Trungpa and Ozil Tenzin, who has since fallen off the good graces because of some of the things that happened in the 80s. I got to tell you, being in his company and being in his community was not a love and light Ram Dass scene like my wife was involved with at the time. Trungpa was a wild, crazy teacher and not dissimilar at all. In fact, very much like what was going on in the Baba Frijan community in 1974, 1975, in the indoor Yajna goddess and the garbage and the goddess. Everything was open: LSD, sex, drugs, rock and roll, swapping, flipping, and if you thought you had any grasp on quote unquote reality, social reality, it was challenged, and who you thought you were was confronted. And so it was. I had just come out of the Army, so I know what it's like to have a drill sergeant in my face. I sometimes thought being around that world was not dissimilar from boot camp in Fort Dix, New Jersey. It was a confrontation, and it was wild. So Naropa was, in 74, 75, was a screaming macho, a wild time. You thought you were you didn't know where you were. It was wild. It's just a piece of history in taming the American ego in its youthful vitality, just this American stuff that you can do anything you want to do and it's just freedom. And everybody's awakened anyway now with LSD and psilocybin and mushrooms and peyote back in those days. Basically Trungpa had to tame that youthful enlightenment, if you will, and even took Ram Dass to task at Naropa and many other people to task. So Trungpa was no minor leaguer.
Yeah. No, always have appreciated him very much.
Yeah.
So let us move to your introduction to Adida Samraj from that point.
Well, never moved. I was always, I was a student or studying the teachings of Adida or Baba Frijan or Franklin Jones at the time when I was first introduced to him in 1972 and 1973. But I'm not a theist. I'm primarily Buddhist oriented. So this kind of God thing never really attracted me. But his teaching was profoundly influential. And
what was the first thing you read?
The Knee of Listening.
Knee of Listening.
Yeah, and then I was always a subscriber to the magazines and the books. So I followed everything from Method of the Siddhas and Garbage and the Goddess. But once you get into that kind of I don't know. I just was not attracted to the scene. I liked what he was talking about, but that whole scene was not an interest to me. Until later on, when I was doing theater. I taught in mental institutions, residential treatment centers. I always worked in very difficult educational centers and street environments. So up until around 82, I really had no interest in enjoying the community, and the teaching had developed. I was staying with it and reading the Laughing Man magazine and things of that sort, but
Uh-huh.
I was pretty much practicing Buddhism, and had left the Choryong Trungpa Rinpoche community
Mm-hmm.
and started going off on my own, just as a regular person, not any practitioner, but always meditating.
Mm-hmm.
And then stopped doing the drugs because meditation proved to be more reality based, because drugs are always a mediated experience, and the delusion that it brings is inherent in taking substances, because once you start to experience other levels of reality, you really don't know what is yours and what is the drug, and then you start to identify with the drug experience without having any real. There's a lot of delusion and egoic seduction when you're elevated to heights of experiences that are not your state. They're given to you for however the drugs turn your molecular structure open, and that spirit enters, and the light comes into your third eye, and you start to travel. There's a lot of delusion with that, because it's not your normal state. So I started to do meditation because I saw the limits of what drugs or substances can do.
Yeah, I think I had a similar realization that at some point, well, it stopped becoming interesting and satisfying, but at some point, you don't really know what's yours and what's the drugs. You can't really tell. So that becomes, a limit that you can't really pursue it past that.
Well, that's where the delusion, you can buy it and think you got it, and then you come down and you can say, I know a lot of people who are running down the streets naked back in the old days, screaming that there's only God, there's only God, and Jesus is here, or I'm Jesus. Believe me, I've spent times in mental institutions too, where people had those experiences and were put in mental institutions, and they were not different than Jesus. Or I've run into people like Charlie Manson, so I know what a crazy, crazy person is. Seriously crazy.
So what? Tell me something more about how your relationship to Adida and his teachings developed and led you to Beezone.
Well, quickly, I finally did go see the community in 1982 or 83. I went there in 83, but I probably went and visited in an early 80s. Probably May of 83 is when I was heading back to New York to do theater, because I was into theater also. And then I had my sister worked for Pan American Airways. I had flying standby, and she said, you have another slot on the ticket. And I said, well, put San Francisco and let me see what this community is about. So I went out there, and they met some people. They had a Friday night movie show at the bookstore on C Street in San Rafael. And I stayed and I watched the movie and walked out, and they said, oh, by the way, we're having a no remedy seminar the next day. Would you like to attend? And I said, sure, why not? So I attended the seminar with James Steinberg, and at that time his wife Eileen Steinberg. And I was profoundly affected by the Siddhi of Adida. I did not recognize the Siddhi as Adida. I just knew that I spent 8 hours in that back room feeling I had dropped 250 micrograms of LSD, and I couldn't understand what was happening. Although I had identified that siddhi pouring through my whole body, and mind as something I had been familiar with, but not identified with Adidas. So I knew there was something there. I wasn't quite, I didn't have that sense of him as the source, but I knew something was there that I needed to investigate. So anyway, I came back, left New York, and came back to San Francisco and became a teacher in the Adidas community with children that at that time was a vibrant, full-blown community of anywhere between 800 to 1,000 people in the whole northern area. I mean, it was a cottage industry. It was booming. It had a lot of vitality. It had people. I mean, they started health food stores, and it was a vibrant community.
Yeah, I didn't know that about you. Where were you teaching?
In San Rafael, in the community, and they had a school, the Big Wisdom School, and they had, and then they had the Garden of Lions in New York for the upper level children. But they had the Ice Cream and Shoe and Stephanie and some of the women started the toddler school, and then we had the main elementary school that went to, I think, 8th grade. So some of these people now who are big people in the community, I knew them when they were, 10, 11, 12, 13 year old little wise ass kids,
Like who?
Oh, I'm not going to mention names, but I'll give you some initials.
That's okay. You don't have to.
Yeah.
That's early 80s.
Yeah, and then you had the scandals in the '85 scandal with the drugs and Guru, and this is after. This is right after Jonestown. Oh, Jonestown was a little later, but anyway, all of that period of time when some of this stuff, the power games were starting to really be a dark impact in this whole, whether it be Muktananda coming in '74 or whatever. The power games with this world of gurus and disciples and freedom, and it was matching with the freedom of sex, and everything was open. It was an open book. So then it just hit the San Francisco Chronicle in 1985 about the lawsuits that were coming out of these experiments that had been going on since, for more than 10 years, but they finally reached the level of lawsuits and mass media and the Today Show, and just Daffrey John, his name at the time, hit the front pages of every national, well, not every, but the Today Show, which is a national morning talk show in America, and it's like Morning Joe today, and the San Francisco Chronicle, which is a major national newspaper. Mm-hmm. Daffrey John's crazy, wild face was on the front page. It was almost like, with the name Daffrey John, Crazy Guru, Sex and Slavery, Sex Slavery. I mean, it just devastated.
How was that for you?
Oh, I believe me, when I first came to the community, I was not, I'm not just a true believer, as Eric Hoffer would put it out. Most of the people that I wound up being associated with were the outliers, the people who were in the community, in the inside world of this craziness, but I knew that stuff was going on. I'm not a moralist, I've been around the block.
Yeah, no. So you did you find it disturbing to see that display of exposure?
No, I understood it. I'm coming from a Trump place where this stuff was going on also. Mm-hmm. So although it appeared that all this, and it was, I mean, if you go in there naively and you get sucked up by the energy and the peer pressure and the alcohol and the other substances that were being in the middle of all of this stuff, and you just submitted to it unconsciously or subconsciously or with some kind of an idea, oh, maybe I'll, learn something or whatever. And if you just submitted to that without full recognition that it is your participation, as nobody made anybody do anything, although the social pressures were there. Oh, come on. Oh, come on. Oh, come on. If you yield to that, then you're screwed, because you're going to go with the group. And the group mentality turns to madness, because you lose your own sense of morality, ethics, right and wrong. You're submitting for something greater than yourself. And if you don't do that with discrimination, you're a deep poop, because
that's right.
You really are. And I've seen people say no, and they say, okay, get out of here. And so you were out. But if you were feeling out, then you had to deal with that.
Right.
So there's a play there, but no different than what was happening in many other centers along that same period of time. So 85 was a big explosive time in the period. And then throw in the divine emergence in 1986 when the renunciate period came in, and then forget that. That was the purge. That's when it all fell apart. And that's where, not all fell apart, but that's where a major part of the community was really thrown into a tailspin, because nobody could square what was going on. Plus, how the hell are you going to deal with renunciation, 6th stage? I mean, the stuff that was going on while people were confessing back in those days was literally bizarre, insane, and basically stupid from an intelligent point of view. It was mass stuff. So this is where you can get really messed up with a collective mind that is just blindly following a teacher, but it's not the teacher. See, this is where you need some discrimination. So it's a much more, it needs more developed consideration. And I think it's a major part of the misunderstanding. And Adida has been tried and convicted in the court of public opinion to be a bizarre egomaniac and a God complex, whatever, for the majority of the understanding of who he is. And he's still, not he, but the community has never fully and intelligently, as much as that can be talked about, has never really dealt with it. It's hidden it, and it's tried to put a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on its face. It doesn't work. And that's why people are not even closely, people approach him because his wisdom is so great, but they can't buy the guru thing with knowing the history.
So in your mind, and probably a lot of other people's, the problem with Adida's acceptance as the world has to do with his devotees and not with him.
Say that again?
So the conviction of Adida, the presentation in the way that you described, that has to do with his devotees and not him.
Yeah, that's the devotees of the public faith. He's not a public person.
Right.
He's in the room. He's like, what's the guy in India who Aurobindo? Nobody knew Aurobindo. He was in a room. He never spoke pretty much to anybody. So anybody knew anything about Aurobindo was from the mother. But the same way with the community. Nobody knows Derrida except through the community and the literature that he puts out, which very few people can even comprehend or read today. So there's a conundrum going on in the world today that the face of Derrida is the community. What's the old saying? You could know the teacher by his students.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know.
So
go ahead.
Can I intuit that your development of Beezone is an attempt to set the record straight?
Well, no. Really, the Beezone has started with my homework. My attempt. Now remember, I'm a teacher, and a teacher implies I'm a student. So I'm not just following the next Chevrolet or the next electric car going down the highway and being impressed by the shiny fenders. I want to know what the engine is. I want to know what's motivating that engine. So for me, I needed to understand. I mean, you can hear the cultural collective mind. But what is your mind? What is your understanding? And do you have a voice to express that? So I was always, I'm not an insider. I was never of that. I would never be given that permission, because I always was looked at as somebody who was, whatever, an LMI student, not developed, and whatever, still dealing with things, not really understanding, whatever. But I'm a student, so I want to understand the teaching. So I took Beezone. Now, with my development, I was into the internet world way before the World Wide Web. I was way into the information brokering. I went to Berkeley. I studied library sciences. And so I'm really an information junkie. A student. I'm a student. So I'm studying. I want to understand. I don't just want to believe. I don't want to follow. I want to know the nuance, because I realize, you got to dig deep. You got to go deep. Not just you and their books, but you and your own practice. You have to go deep. And it's not Sunday school. This is not Sunday school. Or you could turn it into Sunday school. And that's what makes it culturally palatable. It's pablum. And you can make it palatable, and you can make it ethical, and you can make it moral, and you can make it religious, and you can make it what fits with the world that we live in today as a moral standard, as a standard of what's popular, what's palatable, what's acceptable. But, not everything is within those boundaries of, that bandwidth. The world is a crazy place.
So you were a student and you were doing homework and trying to understand. And that was your impulse to share your understandings and your journey with Beezone?
Yeah. So I started, and then I finally, when the web came around, I was in the web way before the World Wide Web in 1993. So around 1998, because I'd already developed another website that turned out to be really very, very good for me. But that was my whole drug and alcohol counseling work, which was another part of my life. But I got into the World Wide Web and learned programming. I worked with Stuart Brand and the Whole Earth Catalog people down there in Sausalito.
Uh-huh.
So I was very early in this whole world of internet and computers, and not just computer software, but hardware and conductivity and modems and things of that sort. So I've always it just caught my attention that this was the future. I saw that very early on in the late 70s and early 80s. It was almost dropping acid when I saw what was potentially available to communications and information and what was happening. So anyway, by 1998, I had established Beezone.com, posted it, developed it, put things out on it, and, slowly developed. And I actually I put it into a little booklet and gave it to Adidas as a gift in 1999. And of course, that gift never got to him. So he had never had any exposure to what I was doing. Of course, the community was so closed that you had to go through these narrow gates. So for me to come out into left field with this new technology, that was not controllable. That was not like, whoa, what are you doing, Mm-hmm. So in the beginning, I had people coming down going, okay, Ed, what are you up to? Because I was not a student. I left being a formal student in '86, but I would always maintain a positive and a friendly relationship with the community members and the institution. And I was invited to see Adida all the way through, every time he went to Northern California up through 2006. So I was never seen as a dissident or an angry young man or, whatever. But they couldn't put me in a box, and they didn't understand it, and they wanted to kind of.
So you did get to spend time in his company in Northern California
Oh yeah, lots of time. Lot, yeah. Yeah. No, I was always invited up. And then my wife, because of her associations with other community members, and she's a well-versed person in the world of, she was with Ram Dass for 40 years. So,
4 or 40?
40 years. Hmm. But nobody could get a handle on what the Beezone was. Although it seemed to have that don't ask, don't tell mentality about it.
Like Adida up close in a way?
Adida, what Chris is doing was different. If to put the Adida up close and Beezone, we were working, and we used to work together. But that was a more formal, informal attempt at devotees to fight the anti-guru light mind, other websites that were out there that were, there's a lot of controversy. It never has been dealt with, and this is what goes back to what I was speaking to earlier.
I found Light Mind about a month after I became a formal devotee, and it rocked me.
Yeah.
And then I ended up getting into some Dharma debates a little bit, but then eventually I gave that up.
Oh, you can't. There's no way, because if you're having to defend the wild, crazy, left-handed path of Adida or the community and some of the immature responses and how they took that on, and some of the explanations that fell flat on the face of anybody who had a half a wit.
Yeah, it's not that. I mean, and not to go too much into me, but I always feel, when I see things presented in the public forum that are wrong, in my understanding, I try and set things straight, to the best of my ability, to bring, sort of peace to the conversation, to bring people into relationship with each other. Anyway, that's me, but.
No, I mean, there was other people, and I could mention names, and there were some very well-versed people in the community who took the stand to be a defender and could enter into the fray, into the rooster fight, and of course it just comes out as you're just trying to defend. I mean, you can't explain.
No, you can't defend that. Once you're defending, you've lost.
You fall into the trap of the other, this and that.
Right. And you're getting back to Beezone a little bit. I know I've used Beezone in the past to, to advertise, like the Conscious Light film. You've been very gracious to allow that kind of use of Beezone. And I was just wondering, what is the reach of Beezone? Like, do you measure statistics? How many people come to the site?
Yeah, yeah. No, I want to know where they're coming from. Yeah. So I use Google Analytics. So I mean, I'm not looking at your IP address and your what your phone number is. I don't give a hoot about that. I want to know where you're coming from, what city you're coming from, and what are you reading. And that's all available on Google Analytics, and you can find that. So there are, it depends on I have different analytics to kind of go through what are bots and machines coming through Beezone and just collecting data, or what's a real person.
Really?
So, on a conservative estimate, 5 to 10,000 people a month come to the Beezone, spend time. And my job as an editor and a publisher and a writer to look at what it is that those people are studying or reading or spending time on, not just, 1 minute here and 3 minutes there, what people are studying. And out of that, I develop what I then say, okay, this is an interest to a number of people. So I will go in that direction to develop what's of interest and what people are looking for and to study. Mm-hmm. But pretty much, I'm not following too much that. I do that, but I pretty much develop my own understanding, or what I post on Beezone is through my connection with other people and what the conversation is in their world. So I live close to Boulder, Colorado, and I still have people I associate with the community. I have people in the Neem Karoli Baba ashram, people with the Ram Dass people, and other people in the Ken Wilber world. And mm-hmm. So I do a lot of social interaction out there. And so I will be in a discussion with people, and then I will go back to Arida or Richard Robertson and Buddhist Tibetan work. And then I will tie in Adida's Dharma with these other people who are studying, whether it be Christianity or Judaism or whatever, because Adida is so inclusive. He's not excluding anything. He's not saying, he's right and you're wrong. Not right. Even close. But that's what the most perception, the kind of, fundamental level of things is, it's only by me and I'm the only one. And the seventh stage stuff gets...
That's all those conversations we've had about Adida's relationship with the non-dual world.
Oh, yeah.
It just falls on deaf ears.
Right.
But it's interesting to me because you've talked quite a bit on the intellectual side of what it is, the Dharma as opposed to the guru. And as you know, the guru devotion is a key component of Adida's teaching. So what can you tell us about your relationship, your personal relationship to Adida? How do you square all those things? What can you say about it?
Not much, tell you the honest truth. And I'm not being coy, all right? I'm not being coy. The evidence is there out there, so I don't really need to defend myself in any way, nor do I have to proclaim anything out there. It's whatever you get out of what I do is on the Beezone, and when you talk to me, whatever you get from my conversation of who I am comes through. I'm not trying to put a flag or a button on my shirt to say that I'm got this relationship with Adida. There's no mistaking it. If we had the intimacy and the time, I would definitely share the depth relationship as much as I can about his influence in my life, which is profound and unmistakable because I spend this is my work. So it's not a casual thing. And if I found it, and I always like to say, well, if you have something better than Adidas, please let me know, because I'd be interested in seeing what that is. Because personally, I can't find anything even remotely close to the wisdom. And I study a lot. So, to answer your question in a real way, he's a profoundly strong influence in my life. And I don't sell it to anybody. If they like me, then they must understand that I have a teacher, that I sit at his feet and submit to. Now, that submission is not like when you were mentioning the devotional aspect of his teaching. You really have to understand that it's just not Catholicism or kneeling at the altar of a statue in a church.
Right.
There's a tangible force that has to be felt if you have a sense of things. And it doesn't have a locality. It doesn't have a spot on the board. So, you're really speaking about an all-inclusive, transcendental radiance that you have to have some understanding. If you feel anything more than your 5 watts, as he said, then you got to consider what it is that is beating your heart and the feeling that you have as an individual, as a person. So, I mean, I don't even try to do it.
Well, you did a pretty good job, Ed.
Well, I meditate a lot, and I'll tell you the honest thing, it's really a kind of funny thing, because when people ask me these questions and I'm supposed to have an answer, I sit for a long period of time every morning. And when I come up from meditation, and it's just not quieting the mind, it's got a yogic aspect to it. And then I ask myself, could I explain to somebody what I just experienced in the last hour and a half?
Right.
And I laugh, because there's no freaking way I could even begin to explain what meditation for me is. Although it's powerful and strong and directive, and we're speaking about, not just speaking about this bandwidth that we're speaking on now, on this cultural level and language, and trying to make sense and using proper speech and things like that. It's much deeper, the whole problem. So devotion is the beginning aspect of it, because you have to understand that you as an individual it's a whole questionable proposition to begin with, what ego is. And Buddhism has those 3 marks of existence, and one of them is no ego. And then Adida has the contraction as ego, or the activity, and that what that is. And so here we're basing a conversation on assumptions that I'm a me and you are you, and we're just making those assumptions using language as a base to communicate and make sense. But on a Catholic school level or a rudimentary level, yeah, we'd play that out. But there's a hell of a lot more going on than just,
Yeah, I know I relate to that for sure.
Yeah, so there's a certain kind of what Trungpa would call Vajrayana. There's a certain kind of, you got the Hinayana school where you're doing the monk, or you're getting your own enlightenment. And the Mahayana approach was where you work with the world, right? You start dealing with the world in your bodhisattva way, sattva. And so, those are kind of metaphors I like to use. Then you have the Vajrayana world, which is the world of the unseen, or the forces that are really directing this,
Mhm.
this manifestation, the wrathful deities and the peaceful deities and the white taras and the mahakalas and those are the forces that you see as hurricanes and manifestations of nature that are way beyond our comprehension. And these are real forces. And
You know, when you were describing your understanding of Adida, who he is to you personally and very eloquently, it just reminds me of, I always come to this, that Adida used to say that everybody's sadhana is completely unique. And their relationship with him and his teaching is completely unique. So to hear you confess yours is not an attempt to make it the same for anybody else. It's just to hear you speak.
no, this is why he's so wonderful, because he's so inclusive. He includes everything. To what's that old Zen patriarch? To make the smallest distinction is to set the heavens and hells and heavens infinitely apart. The world of 10,000 things infinitely apart. And this is really the key: is once you make that, what he used to say, identification, differentiation, and desire. Once ego is created, then the world of 10,000, it all, self, other, and world, all as simultaneously manifested. Well, people take this stuff as real. This is the real world, and it is the real world. But it's not just the real world. Reality transcends this phenomenal world of perception and culture and history. And, we're building on this. We all have bodies and minds and children, and we have to eat and live in nice warm houses, if you will, and have electricity. And that's what the first three stages are about, as he points out. And this is no different than what Maslow's hierarchy of needs is about, or any other developmental progress of human development.
I'd like to follow one more thread, if you will.
Yeah.
And that is the influence of Adida's Dharma in the world. And because even though, and I'll set it up from my experience, even though, as we all know, Adida is not recognized as who he is, still when I, play on the internet and social media and different groups, I experienced that what he's said in many ways has become part of the general understanding of the world and philosophy. Is that similar to how you see it?
Yeah, but yes, absolutely. Now remember, Adida is if anybody who has more than a 75 IQ studies the world, history, sociology, psychology, philosophy, you will bump in to Adida. There is just no two ways. If you're a serious student of any discipline, you're going to bump into Adida. And you can either do one of a couple of things. You can start to take some of his Dharma, like you did, or we did in the 80s or the 70s with enlightenment of the whole body, or the eating gorilla comes in peace, or all those other, incredibly enlightening books. And you can take that. And many, 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 many people have. And people of our age now are sitting in places of power and influence and are actually rapping out Adida's words without acknowledging where the source was from. But it fits in a universal understanding because he is universal. So you can give the Dharma without, what's he say? You can take the soup without the cook.
That's one of my favorites.
And people will. They'll take the soup. Or as he used to say in the old days, they'll take the bone. You know, you do the dog and the bone. So his influence is profoundly affecting the world. Now, his word is basically what we're speaking about, his word, his teaching, his literature. Now, people cannot read, at least my understanding, they can't, unless you're a devotee, you can't read anything after, you can read the Aletheon kind of, but after 85, the language changed. So most of the people who I associate with say, boy, I really want to hear some of the stuff that he wrote about in Scientific Proof or Transmission of Doubt or Enlightenment of the Whole Body. So his influences profoundly affected a lot of people, but his person and his function as a guru is still not acceptable to, he cannot, Nirvanasara, which every Buddhist should have on his or her bookshelf, is completely outside anybody's understanding. And if you're a serious student of Buddhism, and if you don't understand that another name for Adidam is the Advaita Buddhist society or culture. So, Nirvanasara as a book talking about the influence of Adida, just taking one little segment of the community of practitioners, the Buddhist people, like I was just up in Naropa in the Shambhala Center. There's no copy of Nirvanasara up there. So, because of his person and the face that the devotees have put out there, and it is the devotee's primary responsibility to bring Adida to the world. Adida is not a public person.
Right.
He's not. So anything you know about Adida, now that he's not embodied, is completely 200% the responsibility of devotees. Has nothing to do with who he is. It is through devotees that people will understand or get some sense of. Because you can't just show a picture, in my mind. You may be able to, and other people have traveled around the world with a murti form, and just showing that, thinking that's it. And he's actually said, just show my form, show my form. Well, that's one way. It's not the only way.
Yeah, some people really respond to that.
Yeah, and some people respond to his art, some people respond to the Dharma, some people
respond
respond to the devotional aspects of it. So it's not, this is the way to do it, and this is the way to do it, and this is the way to do it.
Yeah.
At all.
Because really, we have no idea. You know.
Oh, if you come up
in the larger scope of things.
No, as he says, the guru does the yoga, the divine does the yoga. It's not you. I mean, you got to participate with him, just like you got to participate with the force of his siddhi, if you're a meditator or whatever. You know, I'm not controlling that force, but I have to definitely conduct and be in that. And that's not always a simple mind, because that what he speaks about, his descending force, is quite powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm feeling like we've covered a lot of material, and I'm really grateful that, for the time that you shared with me.
Okay.
Before we, Ed, I want to thank you so much for the time that you've spent and for the work you've done your entire life in bringing Adida's teaching and person and wisdom to the world. I really appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate you reaching out and asking me to speak with you this morning. So I look forward to another conversation, hopefully.
Great.
Okay.
the next time.